The CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Glen Alexander.
Welcome back here to the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. As always, here I'm your host, Glen Alexander. And on tonight's episode podcast, I am rejoined by recurring guests here, Marshall Scott and Dekota Gregory of pistolsfiring.com, pistolsfiringblog.com. And basically, we want to talk to you about the football season here so far, Gundy's comments here that he's made lately, and what we think is going to happen here to end out this one. And heck, we got the whole offseason to give you a preview of next year. But Marshall and Dakota, I'll lead off with you guys here. Did the TCU game go any differently than you thought it would?
I thought it'd be a little bit closer, and I think Oklahoma State's offense was finding ways to move the ball pretty well. It's just you'd get an interception, that Ollie fumble going in, obviously hurt. So I think that the score should have been closer. I think it was a better matchup for Oklahoma State. TCU doesn't like to run the ball as much as other teams. We obviously know that's a area where Oklahoma State's defense struggles, and likewise, TCU doesn't stop the run all that well. So you thought Oklahoma State could get something going on the ground, and they did. Ollie surpassed 100 yards. So I thought it'd be a little bit closer. I just think Oklahoma State made some critical errors on drives. You mentioned the interception, the Ollie fumble, and then they felt like they had a lot of penalties from last night or from a couple nights ago. I don't remember really what the number was, but it felt like they had at least crucial penalties. So I think the offense was moving the ball well for it to be closer. It just didn't end up closer. But that's just kind of how it's been going for Oklahoma State here lately.
Yeah, I definitely thought it would go closer as well. And if you would have told me Thursday or Friday and we were putting in our picks, and you would have told me then that, hey, Ollie Gordon's going to run for 100 yards, does that change your pick? I might have still picked OSU to win, just because after 19 years, I know everyone says a lot about Mike Gundy right now. We'll get into that, but just how things usually go for his teams, you're like, they're going to find a way to win something. And I really thought the 3 games left in their schedule, really the games left after their bye week, that this was their best chance to win. So imagining this team with everything they went through to go winless in the Big 12 seemed crazy. So if there was going to be a win they're going to get, I thought it would be this weekend. But I picked them to lose, but I was definitely surprised that it was a blowout. I thought they would at least hang with them, especially, again, like Marshall said, if Ollie Gordon ran for 100 yards, I would think, oh, well, then they were doing pretty solid.
Yeah, why do you think the team is playing so poorly overall right now? I mean, it seems like it's not, I don't want to pinpoint just one player. It seems like the team as a whole here is not playing. Is there any specific thing that I'm missing on, or it's just kind of a bigger deal?
I think it's just really a somewhat simple matter of they can't stop the run and they can't run the ball. I think that, a lot of teams who struggle in those two areas aren't going to win a lot of football games. On the offensive side, it's kind of head scratching as to why the run game hasn't been there this year. You return all those offensive linemen, you obviously return Ollie Gordon. But on the defensive side, you kind of get it a little bit. Colin Oliver, not necessarily known as a run stopper, more of a pass rusher, but he's, would surely help in that area. And obviously Nick Martin, tackles everybody in sight, would help in that area. And then even here lately, Trey Rucker's been banged up. It felt like his impact maybe hasn't been as pertinent. I think on the offensive end, you're still kind of scratching your head. It was better in Fort Worth, but at this point in the season, I'm not sure what that exactly gets you. As for the defense, there are some, you can point to the injuries, but they've kind of been getting ran on all year, and I'm not really sure at this point what they're going to do about it.
I think if I just had to pinpoint at least one thing, I would just defense. Like, that's what I keep saying in my predictions every week. Until I see any remnants of anything changing this defense, I don't think this team can win another game with the defense they have. It would take a really, really good Mason Rudolph, James Washington. There was times when people didn't like Glenn Spencer's defense, but they had such an elite offense they can keep up. Like, that's what would be required for this offense to win. And obviously that hasn't been there. And like I said, Marshall, we have no idea why it's not that with the talent they have, and why they're not like that. But I think, you think back, Baylor, they scored 28, and it really didn't seem close. 28 points should get you a win, if not pretty close. You scored 35 against BYU. We all know they gave up gave a touchdown in the last minute. So even when the offense does what it's supposed to do or enough to win, it's still not enough with this defense right now.
Yeah. So I do want to, of course, ask about Gundy here, but I want to start off with the question of why do you think his press conferences, or at least what he says to the media, has changed in tone here? Is this something else that's not just completely front of mind here? But I mean, I think it's an easy answer, but I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I think it's just, that losing isn't fun. And as somebody who's, in there and, it's not the most fun place to be. I certainly respect the fact that, losing is not a good time. So I've likened, his comments from last Monday in 10 Thoughts this week, sort of to, the man in the arena speech that I think Tom Brady's given. And that is the case. It's got to be tough doing your job when you've got hundreds of thousands of people sort of judging your every move. That's got to be ridiculously stressful. So I certainly get that. I think his comments from last Monday kind of went past that by quite a way. So certainly not the ideal thing to say when everybody knows at a time like this, NIL, money around programs are so important. But I at the same time, the mood of the press conference is sort of going down. I think it sucks to lose, and I can see where he's coming from in that aspect.
I think those of us that have covered Gundy long enough too, or Marshall obviously and I are that old, but this is when you do kind of see that Gundy, when he does have the reputation of maybe not being great with the media, it is when he's losing. And like I think I mentioned the last time I was on your podcast, kind of the greatest Mike Gundy you get is bowl week. Like you're in his office sometimes, he's done. No one cares if you win or lose. You're in a bowl game, whether it's a big bowl, Camping World Bowl or Sugar Bowl. Like that is the best Mike Gundy you see. And I think the more stress and more pressure, which comes with losses, is when you're going to see Gundy kind of do the things like he did last Monday. Now that was, I would say, other than the "I'm a man, I'm 40" speech was kind of insane. It's going to always top the list. But I would say last Monday was even the tough press conference I've sat through or even listened of Mike Gundy. That was still up there on some of the off the wall kind of disgruntlement we've heard from him. But I think any coach in the country can get like that after, again, seven losses. Fans are frustrated, obviously, but when you're the guy in charge of those 7 losses, I can only imagine how ticked off you get then too as well.
So what do you think happens through these final 2 games? Do we see more of, and I've heard several pronunciations here, so I believe I have it right, but Milwaukee Smith,
Milwaukee, I think, but
Milwaukee. Okay.
That's what I just said, but I'm still not confident in it. And even typing it's tough.
Mr. Smith, number 8 at QB2. Do you think we see more of him this season, or do you think it's kind of still as much as we've seen him so far in his participation in each game and Bowman for most of the games?
It's tough to say, honestly, because I've thought for a little bit now, and I certainly get the aspect of, was he just running the scout team a couple of weeks ago? Maybe he's not totally ready. So maybe you work him in and then you're thinking, okay, they've got this bye week this week. Could they work him in a little bit more? But at the same time, it's going to be senior day. Alan Bowman, he's obviously last year was monumental for the program in terms of winning the final Bedlam, getting to 10 wins. Getting to the Big 12 title game. So I think that he should be celebrated. I think this year really sucks for a lot of people. It definitely sucks for Alan Bowman as well. So you kind of wonder about that a little bit. But I think it's getting to the point where you've got to work him in a little bit just because, it'd be good to know what you have moving forward. But a weird part about that is, you've got Garrett Rangel, you've got Zane Flores. So kind of how does any of it end up working out? There's a lot of question marks there, but I would like to see him get a little bit more run, but also at the same time, let's not totally just kick Alan Bowman out the door just because the season has been so tough for a lot of people, but especially I'd imagine being Alan Bowman.
Yeah, I agree with Marshall too, because I think as far as the Bowman stuff, because I remember being at Bedlam and he's wearing the Josh Fields jersey and everyone's talking about how great this guy is and he's a good guy just from, the little bit I've gotten to talk to him. I know Marshall's talked to him a lot more. Like, he's a guy, you don't root for players, but you want to see a guy like that succeed. He's great with media. He's open. Even he's been benched mid-game and all that. Like, what was it after his first bench? He was out in the media the next time and just say, hey, this is how I handled it. So he's a great dude, which, you expect from a guy who's been playing ball for 7 years. But I do think your main job is to look out for the program. as much as I think he deserves probably his third or fourth senior night. Hopefully the fans still celebrate him on that. But I do think it's almost like hey, let's give him some. We'll probably give Smith more drives, right? I mean, that you got nothing to lose. The only thing you're focusing on right now, if you're Mike Gundy, is the future. And I know Smith is probably down the line behind Flores and Rangel. But, I mean, what do you have to lose if, again, we hear Mike Gundy talk every season about why is someone not getting reps? Oh, well, they don't have experience yet. Well, you got nothing to lose. This is your time to get that guy experience. And then you enter next season replacing a 7-year veteran with 3 guys who, well, Flores didn't have experience, but you at least have 2 guys with a little bit of experience under the belt other than, hey, we're going to be in the same predicament and just throw whoever out there with no experience. So if I was in that position, obviously I don't make $7.5 million to be in that position. I would be like, hey, let's just kind of look to the future. But I can also see where you're like, hey, let's save face and try to do as much as we can this season as well.
Yeah. I don't want to speculate too much over the offseason here, but I do want to ask you guys kind of down these final 2 games. Do you think we see some different offensive play calling, some, I mean, I don't know how many different defensive schemes we can roll out there, just because Marshall, you asked a great question to Gundy, point blank about the defense, about why he's playing the guys he is and not running 3-3-5. And I mean, just said he doesn't have the guys, right? So offensively, do you think we see anything different? And then kind of leading the next season, do you think that maybe a coordinator change? And if so, which one?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crossroads that Oklahoma State football is at right now. Is it one guy? Is it 2 guys? I thought this somewhat towards the end of 2022 when that kind of just like started to tailspin, that it would be somewhat shocking to see the same staff back. And it ended up not being, but it was kind of a different thing because Derek Mason goes on sabbatical. So then that's how they bring in Brian Nardo. So, and that had been discussed a little bit beforehand, right before that bowl game. Scott Wright wrote something that something along the lines of like Derek Mason's contract was just for a year, or hadn't been signed, or something along those lines. So that was kind of a question mark going into the bowl game that not a lot of people talked about, just because by that point the season felt doomed. So that ended up happening. But then, with this season, it's tough to say. Obviously, the defense is what it is. At the same time, you feel for Brian Nardo because, kind of like my question alluded to, they're not running the system that he was brought in to run. So, it's like, how much can you really pin that on him, where he's, stepping into a staff that's already pretty well established in asking to run now, the defense that he didn't come in here with. So, and then offensively, it's looked good at times under Casey Dunn. It's looked bad at times under Casey Dunn. But I think what's hurting him right now is that, those high highs haven't happened yet that you maybe got with the Yurcich. And obviously, guys like Holgerson and things like that. They've had some good serviceable offenses. You think to 2021, obviously that defense was really, really good. But Spencer Sanders with his legs and stuff made a lot of game-winning plays that year. So it's tough. It's just all, there's so much that's going wrong. And then you wonder, do you want to, if both guys, is that too much change going on? The Gundy program's kind of been built on stability. So does blowing up everything make it, a little too shaky? I don't know. It's just been such a bad season that, who thought back in August, this is the conversations that we'd be having at this point.
Yeah, just to piggyback Marshall's last point, like I remember when he and I were at media days, and one of his questions he asked everyone, or all the transfers, was like, why OSU? And we both talked afterward of how one of the common answers was stability, kind of consistency is what they said. Is Mike Gundy's always been here. He's been here 19 years. We know the position coach is going to leave around. We know unless something bad happens or your coach just gets a much better job, which is probably a good thing for you. That means you've probably had success. If your coordinator is going somewhere else for a better job, that is why they come here, because that's so rare in college football, especially today. It's usually been rare, but especially today, Mike Gundy's program right now is an outlier. The fact that there is stability, and as people think players don't want, I mean, there are players out there where that's something they want, and it's not worth. They can't find it very often. However, it does seem crazy to, in what seemingly seems at this point like a 3-9 season, and to keep everyone, like to not change anything. As radical as it would be to change two coordinators, I do think Brian Nardo would be the first one to go, just because that's been the I feel like the worst. Like I said earlier, we were talking, it kind of seems like they can't win a game with this defense. But then I think it does suck for him because, again, Marshall's point of, I mean, he hasn't been able to do what he was hired to. I mean, he had the same staff. He's had 2 years. I mean, he hasn't been able this year when Gundy answered Marshall's question, they didn't have enough linebackers. Well, some of that's probably to do with recruit more linebackers, but Brian Ardo's been here. It's his second season. I mean, has he had time to build that depth, and no one knew who he was when he got the job? So he was definitely almost set up to fail in a way, but I do think it would almost help him in the program better if he did go. Maybe if he could actually go somewhere to prove what he can do when he can't have his staff, he can't have the players, he can't get a chance to actually implement his system. Because I don't know if even last year, it wasn't as bad as this year, but even last year, we still never fully saw the Brian Ardo system. Like, we knew there was going to be hiccups implementing an entire new system, but we didn't get to see what happened when they kind of took their licks and what it would come out on the other side. Because I feel like we're still in the middle of them trying to figure it out, but never growing from the growing pains. It's just constant pain at this point.
Yeah, and at the same time, though, can't give up, regardless of what defense you're running, can't give up 6 yards a carry.
Yeah.
That just can't happen. That's just certainly less than ideal whenever you're trying to win football games.
Yeah, one would say so for sure. I don't know how we get back on track here. What do you guys think makes the season a little bit more redeemable? Is it seeing Smith? Is it seeing a coordinator change for this offseason? What do you kind of think would appease the fan base, since you guys have such a good perspective of it?
I think beating Colorado would be pretty cool. Like, obviously that's a tough task to do. But we've talked about this offense and all it had returning. If it could somehow get it together in Colorado in like a cold November morning against a pair of Heisman candidates, I think that would be pretty sweet. I think that would at least have some optimism for a fan base that has not had it done here lately. But outside of that, I think seeing young guys and hopefully they perform well, just to give you maybe a little bit more extra hope. If you send them out there, I think, and they struggle, that's perfectly maybe expected. But if they can go out there and play well, then maybe the fan base would be a little bit more hopeful. I think beat Colorado, which admittedly very, very tough to do. I'm not sure that I'm predicting that one to happen, but I think that could at least have a big, a nice going away party for kind of that era of Gordon, Bowman, things like that. So, those are my takes. But obviously, at this point, whenever you've lost 7 games in a row, probably easier said than done.
Yeah, I think just anything to implement hope in your fan base, especially for Mike Gundy. Not only has your football team won or lost 7 straight, fan base is not exactly your biggest fans right now after you take shots in. So anything for them to be like, hey, this guy still knows what he's doing. This guy, we can put our faith in him and know that things are going to be all right. Because right now, I think that's why the fan base is losing their minds and kind of panicking so much, is because all the chips were in on this season. And I think they were all bracing for things to be rough next season. You lose Ollie Gordon, you lose a bunch of linemen, you lose Alan Bowman, who you expected to be a lot better. I mean, you just lost a lot. You knew you were going to take your licks next year. To say, hey, now we're suffering now, and also next year's supposed to be worse. So whether that is throwing Smith out there and seeing how good he is, whether it's getting a guy like Rodney Field some flashes and saving Ollie Gordon, or like Marshall said, a big win against Colorado right at the end to be like, all right, here we go. Like that's the last memory. Just anything you can get for fans, donors and boosters to want to give your money, to still have faith in you in the future. Marshall, you talked again.
We've got a great podcast time, but I'm immediately here at the end of this one, man. iTunes will just show its #1 feed. Well, I want to ask you guys though a little bit about those younger guys on the roster that maybe we can hopefully see a little bit, and hopefully see more. Rodney Fields is making a name a little bit here and there. Oklahoma State's definitely shouting him out on social media if you aren't checking. But want to ask, behind Presley, I assume Stribling and all these other guys are gone, right? Gordon, etc. Of course, Bowman. But besides quarterback, because I think everyone at least knows enough about that to be somewhat versed. But other skill positions here, kind of on the offensive side, is there Shredden? Do we think he makes another leap here, or the other guys here that you're going like, hey, just seen him in practice a little bit here and there. They're currently 2 2 or 3 on the depth chart, but maybe they'd be really good. I'm not really trying to ask you a bunch about the offensive linemen necessarily either there as well.
Yeah, I think, Dejon Stribling could return. He's got an extra year. Obviously, Dakota kind of mentioned, who knows what the team's going to look like next year from a, quarterback perspective, from an offensive line perspective. So, and Stribling's been really good. He ran a hitch route the other day that I just kind of marveled at, and looked weird for a little bit. But so he's been really good. So maybe there's a world where he's like, I'm going to go try to play in the NFL. And I think that, if he got to work out in front of a couple of teams, I think he would impress them. But he could come back. Other than that, you mentioned Rodney Fields. That's a guy who everybody's been stoked for. He hasn't played the last 2 games, I believe. I think they're trying to redshirt him. He's played in 2 games. I think he'll play in these next 2 games to play his 4 games in redshirt. So that's a guy that a lot of people have been hyped up about. Shetron, I think, is, if he could just stay healthy, he can maybe take that next step. But I think he broke his hand in practice this past week, so he wasn't available for that game. Cameron Hurd, they played him a little bit. He caught a pass from Smith. He looked pretty good out there, so maybe you see a little bit more in terms of flashes from him. And then they've got those 2 safeties on the back end, and David Kabongo and Landon Cleveland. I think they struggled a little bit, at TCU. That was kind of they're throwing the ball quite a bit for guys who are playing in their 4th or 5th or 6th games or whatever it's been. Imagine that was quite the eye opener. So I think all those guys are guys that at this point you're watching and hoping play pretty well. But I think the fan base in particular is really juiced for Rodney Fields.
Yeah, Marshall's a lot better rattle the names off than I am, but also another one we've seen a little bit this year is Gavin Freeman. We saw what dangerous as a punt returner. We saw, even saw a little bit of what he could do at OU. He was could be dangerous. He had some issues with some punt returning at some times, but had big returns, had a big rush. We saw him look great in games this season as well. So that's another guy Brendan Presley, talking about Ollie Gordon and the linemen, that's a huge loss you have, especially we see how much the offense is struggling, but still doing all this, Brendan Presley has kind of been the only constant on this offense so far. I'm not saying Gavin Freeman and just going to sub in for Brendan Presley and everything be as normal as like it was with Presley, but he, I think, could be a big guy next year that can help take some pressure off a young quarterback, whoever it might be. And they do Trent Howland is another guy we've seen a little bit of. If he's back, who knows? But that was kind of his plan when Marshall and I talked to him at media day before the season as well, saying, "Hey, I came here to back up Ollie Gordon. Like that, I knew I was going to back up Ollie Gordon, but my plan is to learn from him, and then I want to get to the league. And I think my best option to get to the league was to play here after backing up Ollie Gordon. So I do think if you want some hope for the future, it's the fact of Marshall was able to rattle off a lot of names that will be back. On top of 2 of those big names are at running back to help take pressure off that quarterback that's back there as well.
Yeah, a lot. And Dwayne Lofton also kind of helped with the Presley replacement. Obviously, I don't know that anybody's going to replace Brandon Presley, but having Gavin Freeman and Lofton there, I think will both be big. But I think both have played 4 games, and I think they shut down Lofton at TCU. It seemed because he played his 4th game, so it looks like he's going to redshirt. And then they'd already given Freeman 4 games because Lofton was injured at the beginning of the year. So, but both of those guys are probably going to redshirt. Probably won't play the rest of the year, but could be big pieces for next season.
Well, we definitely take that because I guess we need guys no matter what. Concerning next season, right now, what do you think expectations should be? Let's say everyone returns, nothing really changes. Quarterback, I know, will change, but is this a, hey, maybe we win 3 games, or is this kind of like, hey, maybe it's 6? Or I know the bar is not high necessarily coming to next year, but I'm not asking for an exact record. I'm just kind of saying, hey, compared to this year, what do you think it'll be?
Yeah, I think there's so much that could change with the staff, with the portal, with anything at this point in the year. It's pretty crazy to maybe get a way too early prediction, but I think the standard at Oklahoma State is, and this is kind of why this season has sucked so much, is to make a bowl game. They've had quarterbacks on the way out before, and they've had to replace them, and that's just kind of how time works in college football. So I think the expectation every year for Oklahoma State at this point, because of how good this program has been built by Mike Gundy, is to get to a bowl game, kind of regardless of the circumstance.
Yeah, and it's also like outside. I mean, we're in the OSU bubble, so we're used to kind of how things go there. But even the national thing, I saw something on social media where someone's like, "How is Gundy such a bad coach when expectations are high, but yet the greatest coach ever when expectations are low?" So here we're going into next season not expecting the team to do much, and that'll be like 2023. We weren't expecting that team to do much. They end up with 10 wins and a Big 12 championship game. So again, I picked this team to go 11-1. So you're almost wasting your breath even asking me what I think of anything. And so there's no way to predict what to get from my Gundy team because, again, he's kind of got a knack for exceeding expectations when they are low. So,
yeah, well, I think expectations should be high next year, but maybe higher than this year, at least in the optimistic part of it. Maybe we can exceed expectations next year, whereas this year we definitely know it didn't go that way. Very last question, because I got the basketball and I got the wrestling guy both here on the same podcast here. And of course, I've got a great photo here behind me here for the thumbnail. So I want to ask you guys, who do you think has a better chance of beating current expectations here? Would it be Lutz or would it be Coach David Taylor? Yeah, I mean, I know programs are at a different spot, both of them respectively. And one, of course, is national championship hopes every single year in wrestling. And the other one might be March Madness here, but I'm curious what you guys think as far as who has a better chance of beating their expectations this year.
I would, and this might be the cheap answer, but I'd probably say Lutz just because David Taylor's expectations are so high right now. Wrestling's a really fickle sport, a couple injuries here and there, and all of a sudden your season's looking a lot different than maybe it would have been before. I think that, with him, and it looks like he's recruiting really well, he'll maybe build some of that depth that maybe, injuries wouldn't tank a season, but I don't Dakota the wrestling guy. I'm not sure that they're quite yet. And then with Lutz, they're going to play hard. I think that's what we've learned through these first two games. Is they're going to play extremely hard. They've kind of flirted with those teams who, St. Thomas and Green Bay aren't really teams to write home about in the, big picture perspective. But I've been impressed with how hard they've played. We've gone in the press conference both times, and Steve Lutz has not been happy about the defense. And we're talking to him as if they'd lost the game in his mind. I think he said that they gave up 48 points at the half to St. Thomas, and they lost the second half. So St. Thomas has scored more. And so he said, we can take no victory from that game. And I was just like, holy smokes, like you won. And at one point you're up 17. I think that he's going to have those guys playing hard. So I think if somebody was to go above expectations, I think it'd be him, partly because David Taylor's expectations are so high right now.
Yeah, I would kind of mirror that because I think Lutz's expectations are a lot lower just because of where the program has been.
Yeah,
David Taylor's taken over a guy who's been there for 33 years, won 5 national titles, and this is a fan base that as soon as he got the job, they were like, oh, this is the guy that's going to lead to the national title. It was he's a first-year coach. What's he going to do? This will be exciting. It was national title or bust. Now, I think most of them are saying, hey, they're not expecting them to dethrone Penn State in the first season, but they are thinking within the next 5 years that Oklahoma State's going to be on top, which is kind of, in Oklahoma State wrestling terms, I mean, if wrestling fans hear this, they're going to be like, well, yeah. But from outsiders who are outside the OSU wrestling bubble, that seems absurd to hire any coach and be like, they're going to win a national championship within 5 years. Oh, and it's his first ever college coaching job. So the expectations, for David Taylor, he almost can't exceed expectations because
if they won this year, he would be, but that would be crazy.
Like his expectations are already at the top. So yes, it's very hard for him. Not saying he's going to fail, but I think he could be a very successful head wrestling coach at Oklahoma State and still not necessarily exceed, but maybe only meet expectations that fans kind of have for Cowboy wrestling.
Yeah, I think he's going to I think this is turn the program around type stuff. Not that it was, in the depths at the end of the John Smith era, but it was definitely, clawing back. And I think hiring David Taylor accelerated that. So not to sound like we're poo-pooing on David Taylor. We both think that, we've got such high expectations that it'd be tough for him to exceed those. If he does, holy crap, Oklahoma State wrestling is all the way back.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think in the grand scheme of things, even Ohio States and Iowa States and all these great programs, I still think with David Taylor leading OSU, of all those programs, they still have the best shot of dethroning Penn State. For those who don't know, Penn State just wins it literally every year. It's not like they broke a record for most points scored last year at the NCAA wrestling tournament, and there were still fans disappointed with how they performed. So I think just the splash hire, the talent he's able to bring in. I mean, like we said, the first podcast, it'd be like Tom Brady walking in to recruit you. He's going to bring talent in here. Those other guys can't do that. He talked about having a young staff where they're able to not only recruit that talent, but literally train with them. I mean, Kel Sanderson's 50s, getting older. He can't train day in and day out. This guy won a bronze medal 2 weeks ago, and those guys are getting to wrestle against him. So no other staff in America gets to bring that to him quite at that level as David Taylor. So he does give the best opportunity. But yeah, like we said, the expectations are definitely very, very high for a 33-year-old first-year coach.
Well, Dekota, you know what? I would really love for Tim Rattay to maybe find another gig and Tom Brady to come in to be the QB coach next year. I heard your breaking news with that here, so I'll have to make sure to report that one after this. But I love the analogy, though, so thanks so much. Got to put it in perspective for us, not as plugged-in wrestling fans, but still wrestling fans overall and Oklahoma State fans. And Marshall, of course, I do want to make sure everyone knows, if you are not subscribed to the Pistols Firing on YouTube, you will not see the great Steve Lutz interview post game from that St. Thomas game. And Marshall asked a bunch of great questions there. And yeah, Coach Taylor, he's great, but I gotta say, Lutz so far in every interview I've seen, I'm like, man, if this guy tells it like it is, he's kind of the Gundy of old back in 05, 06 when Gundy was still brutally honest here. I'm not sure where that wore off completely, but it's great that you guys are there asking the questions, providing all the good info. I will definitely link that interview here down below if I didn't already in the description and the subscription box here as well. So thank you guys so much for joining, and thanks for everyone for tuning in to the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. Please follow on Twitter and Instagram for more. And then I think I've memorized now, so I'm going to try to just pull it off here completely straight. Follow at Marshall Scott OK, because I learned from the Scott Wright podcast here that OK is definitely better than this Marshall Scott, and learned the whole details about that. So it was great having the pint there. I think it's Stone Cloud. Did I have that right?
That's Stone Cloud.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So, Stone Cloud and Stillwater, place to head up here. But, and then also follow at Dekota Gregory, Dekota with an E, not with an A at the second letter. I think it's the right way to spell in case anyone's curious. So,
I don't. I'm friends with the guy, and I don't think so.
Dekota comes on and is immediately like, it's the wrong way to spell it. I just wouldn't talk myself down already. I think I'd be like, no, this is the right way. I'd correct everyone else's. So with that all being said here, at least we're not fans of any team in the state of Florida, because they had the one great thing there this week. Every single team, including if the Dolphins lose tonight Monday Night Football as we're recording this, every team in Florida will have lost this past weekend. So at least we're not, at least we're not Florida fans, right?
Yeah. We had the Thunder until Chet got hurt. Now I'm scared.
Well, you do have to bring that up. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Can't really debate you there. I mean, we're up right now over the Clippers here to record this on Monday, November 11th. But thank you guys so much again here for joining, and catch you guys soon on the next episode of the podcast.